Right, the highlight of the day is our keynote speaker, whose title has changed, I understand, as well, so I won't begin to understand what she does, and she can explain it all to you herself. It's Daisey Russell, and Daisey, would you please come forward?
I think we'll be able to judge the highlight bit at the end, frankly, so let's not get too excited yet. Okay, yes, so my name's Daisey Russell. I work for the Council for Disabled Children, and I run the Information Advice and Support Service Network. So that's who I am. We're funded by the DFE. And today I have ages, frankly, so I apologise about that, to take you through the Children and Families Act and some of the changes to Information Advice and Support Services. Now, given this amazing venue and this amazing headpiece, I'm going to do the first half through interpretive dance and the second through mime. However, as I'm being filmed and there is a possibility my boss may one day see this, I probably won't, so that's a shame. I will walk around a lot. If you can't hear me at any stage, just put your hand up and wave. Also, if you have any questions, put your hand up, just ask, okay? Whenever, throughout, interrupt me. If anything I'm saying you don't understand, interrupt me, okay? Because there's no point me doing this unless, you can understand it. I can speak quite fast, so if you need me to slow down, tell me to slow down. Now, if you have questions, I will either answer them, go away and find you an answer, or maybe make the answer up if it's amusing, but probably not. This is new, so this is an act that has come in September, and there are questions and there are things that are not ironed out yet. There are not answers to all of this. Okay, so just to put that out there as well, it's not always just me not knowing anything. Okay, so I'm going to kick off. We're going to go through the act. Oh, I think I have to be here to point this. Okay. Maybe I might be clicking the wrong bit.
No, forward and back.
Forward and back, you see. Oh, look, is that better? No, that's not better.
No.
Ha, here we are, it's okay. All right. So, where are we now? Well, obviously we're in this very lovely theatre. September. We're not even in September, but September is when the implementation of the Children and Families Act began. Now, not all of the Act, but the vast majority of the Act has come in, and there are transitional arrangements in place. So it is not expected that from the 1st of September, everything changed overnight. Okay, not possible. So there's some transitional arrangements, which I will talk about later. So just quickly for schools, so to know that most children who are at School Action Plus will have transferred to what is now called SEN support. I'll talk about it a bit more in a bit. By spring 2015, all pupils moving by September 2015. So, just to keep in mind that you won't go into a school immediately and it won't all have changed. Not everyone will have had a plan after having a statement on the 1st of September. It's not how this stuff works. Okay? Right. Something to be clear about. If a child or young person had SEN before September the 1st, they still do. Okay, the definitions of SEN have not changed. So if anyone is hearing anything, and I'm sure you're not, obviously in Torbay, anyone saying, well, now the law's changed, so your child won't have SEN anymore, or we won't have resources for your child anymore. Okay, unless on the 29th of August, something quite dramatic happened, child or young person will still have SEN, special educational needs. Okay? So I'm sure, like I said, it's not happening here, but we have had some reports in some places of people saying, well, your child will no longer qualify for support. That shouldn't happen. Okay, so what are the new duties? What is their scope? Who does the Act cover? So children with special educational needs and their parent carers. Young people with SEN who are aged over 16 and 25. So the Children and Families Act brings in a new definition of young people. This is legal definition, young people under the Act, aged over 16 and under 25. Okay, it's important to remember. Definition of SEN, as I said, remains the same. And in some sections of the Act, it covers disabled children and young people. Okay, so Act, regulations and codes. So I'm going to talk about an Act, which is the Children and Families Act. And the bit we're talking about is Part 3 of that Act. We're also going to talk about some regulations and the SEN Code of Practice. So you'll have all heard of the SEN Code of Practice. Yeah, okay. So the Act. So this is the law. This is the skeleton. These are the bare bones. And we're talking about the Children and Families Act 2014. This is statute. And this is musts. This is what local authority, CCG, other people must do. Okay, from there we have the SEN Disability and the Personal Budget Regulations 2014. Now, I realise this all sounds very technical, but this is really important. This is where the detail of the law is. This is where rights for children and young people and for parents are set out. It's where duties for local authorities and CCGs are set out. So these regulations are the detail. So there's lots more detail of what local authorities and others must do. And then we have guidance. So the SEN Disability Code of Practice, 2014. This has musts in, and it also has shoulds. So the regulations have musts. If you have a must in a regulation, it must be done. The Code of Practice, again, has some of those musts in, but the Code of Practice introduced shoulds. So local authorities should do this. A school should do that. Now, should is actually quite strong legally if it is in statutory guidance. So a local authority or a school, whoever, they should either do it, if they're not doing it, they need to justify why, and they need to do something similar. Okay, so it is not just oh yeah, you should do it, but if you're not, don't worry. Okay, and that's important to remember. Now, this is an unusual act because it starts off, unlike I think any other act, with principles. And like I said, this is the bare bones, this is the framework. So unusual for an act to have principles in. So section 19, local authorities must have regard to. So local authorities cannot ignore these principles. They must have regard to the views, wishes, and feelings of the child and his or her parent or the young person. Okay, so this is where the kind of cultural change stuff comes in. This is what the DfE and the government expect. This is the importance of the child and parent or the young person participating as fully as possible in decisions. So this is saying this should not be, yes, here we are, oh parent, oh young person, here's what you're going to have, here's what's going to be provided for you, off you go. Everyone should be involved in those decisions. The importance of the child or parent and the young person being provided with the information and support to enable participation in decisions. So making sure that people are able to say, well, these are your options, these are the choices, these are your rights. This is what this decision is going to be about. The need to support the child and parent or the young person to achieve the best possible outcomes. And this is quite an interesting one. Best possible. Well, we don't actually promise anyone else best possible. What is best possible? What could that mean? Now, this is must have regard to. This is not must do. Let's be clear on this. But that's potentially huge. Now, it is likely this is something that will be later on tested in tribunal or in law, because it's difficult to see where that could stop. Is that Eton? For some people, for some children, you could argue absolutely. I think local authority would argue against that because it would go bankrupt overnight. But It's an interesting use of words, but it is there. Okay, so the local offer. Have you all seen your local offer? You all know about your local offer? Yeah, some nods, some not so muchness. Okay, well, Torbay has a local offer. You will have a local offer. It will be on the website. And they're going to talk about it later. So you're going to hear loads more about it. So I shall just give you some headlines. Okay, so Section 30 of the Act. So when we talk about the Act, we're always talking about sections. Parts of the Act are called sections. It's just how it is. Local authorities must set out information on the education, health and care services it expects to be available. So this builds on the existing legal requirements. So local authorities have to list, already have to publish, what short breaks are available, what they expect schools to provide out of their delegated budgets for children with SEN. That's now extended to colleges. So that should already exist. That was with legal duty since, I think, 2001. Not particularly well adhered to, but there we are. And include what education institutions are expected to provide, as I just said. Should have read the slides. Okay, carrying on with the local offer. It must include the support available to children and young people with no education, health and care plan, previously known as a statement. Children, young people and parent carers must be involved in putting together the local offer. Okay, that's a must. Have to be involved, not an optional, as well as other service providers. And there's a duty to review and revise the services commissioned in light of comments on the local offer. So the local offer will exist, it'll be on the website, and there'll be a space where you should be able to put comments on the local offer. About the local offer itself, how it looks, how accessible, but also about the services included in it. Are there any missing? Are there ones listed that don't really exist? Is there an identified need that the local offer at present isn't meeting? Because the local authority needs to know that so it can commission those services. So the local authority also has to publish those comments. I mean, I think it probably has some kind of, line about maybe not publishing one's comments that are, very rude. But it, generally, as long as you avoid swear words or anything, I think they have to publish your comments. This is a yearly thing. They don't have to do this, obviously, weekly. So I was talking about the regulations earlier. If you're very interested in this, and I see no reason why you wouldn't be, you can go and look at the regulations, and they will list all the things that the local offer has to include. Okay, DfE website. That's where they all are. Excuse me. Right. Now, an education, health and care assessment. People heard about this? Have people heard about education, health and care plans and assessments? So it's still a statutory assessment, but what we have had in the past, statutory assessment and statements, are being replaced by education, health and care assessments and education, health and care plans. Okay? So, an education, health and care assessment. A local authority must determine whether to carry out an education, health and care assessment when a request is made by a child's parent, a young person, or a representative of a school or post-16 institution. So as now, you have to request an assessment. Or a child or young person who has or may have SEN is brought to their attention. So if a local authority knows of a child or a young person with SEN, they're brought to their attention, the local authority must decide whether or not to make a statutory assessment. You'll have to excuse me with the coughing. Now, the statutory test for whether a local authority has to make an assessment or not is whether, after having regard to any views expressed or evidence submitted, so So as a parent or as a young person, you'd write to the local authority. I would like to request a statutory assessment for my child or for myself if you're a young person under Section 36. These are my views. Here is any evidence I have. Here's some evidence the school may have. This is why I think you need to assess my child. So if the local authority is of the opinion that the child or young person has or may have special educational needs and it may be necessary for special education provision to be made for the child or young person in accordance with an education, health and care plan. Okay? Now, obviously, that's quite broad. So the Code of Practice gives local authorities some guidance on how they might make that decision, how they make the decision that, yes, this child or young person needs a statutory assessment. So, this is guidance. So there is evidence despite the early years provider, the school or post-16 institution having taken relevant and purposeful action to identify, assess and meet the special education needs, the child or young person has not made expected progress. So basically there is an expectation that schools, colleges, early years settings who have money and resources to support children with SEN, that they've used that money, they've assessed the child, they've tried, and actually they're still not making progress, expected progress. Okay, and local authorities can have and will have their own criteria. Torquay will have a criteria for assessment. However, you have to be very, very clear about this. They cannot have a blanket policy. You cannot say, we do not assess children who are dyslexic. Say, we do not assess children who are reach that level. That is a blanket policy, that's unlawful. It is an individual decision about an individual child. Excuse me. So we have to be really, really clear about that. Because obviously there'll be some children that come to the attention of the local authority who are either very young, so have not been to any kind of provision formally. There'll be children that move into the local authority who clearly need an assessment. And there'll be children and young people who acquire an impairment who need an assessment. So a local authority in those situations wouldn't wait to try and gather evidence. It would assess that child or young person because it's clear they meet the statutory entitlement for an assessment. Okay? So all local authorities will have criteria, as they should do, but they cannot be blanket. Now, what is an education, health and care assessment? It is, as the name kind of gives away, an assessment of the education, healthcare and social care needs of a child or a young person. Okay, but it has to be those three things: education, health and social care. So clinical commissioning groups and local authorities must have arrangements in place for these assessments. Okay, the evidence must be gathered. Excuse me. So local authority have said, yeah, your child needs an assessment, your young person needs an assessment, we'll start an assessment. What has to be gathered? So education advice from the setting they attend, advice from the education psychologist. If the child or young person is visually impaired or hearing impaired, the education advice must be given after consultation with a person who is qualified to teach pupils or students with these impairments. Medical advice from healthcare professionals and social care advice, including details of any existing assessments for social care. That advice has to be there. Okay, so as I said, education, health and care plans, the legal threshold is the same as that for a statement. If a child or a young person has a statement, unless, as I said before, circumstances have changed, they should have a plan. The DfE have made this very explicit, have gone on and on about it quite a lot. That is the expectation. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be some children and young people with a statement who will not get a plan. If they've gone into university, if they've gone into employment, oh, thank you very much, if actually they no longer need the statement because they're doing incredibly well and don't need the support in it. But generally, if you have a statement, you'll get a plan. It has to be drawn up within 20 weeks. So that's shorter than for a statement, and there are more assessments involved. So that's a challenge. It has to be person-centred with a focus on outcomes. Okay, you need to be involved. The child, the young person, the parent should be involved in this from the beginning. It should be looking at that child and young person about their outcomes, their aspirations. What do they want to do? What do they want to be? What are the outcomes they need to help them achieve those aspirations? Okay? And it must include education, health, and social care. And it can, so this is one of the big differences between statements and plans, it can potentially extend beyond school up to 25. Now, it is unlikely that lots of young people are going to have a plan up to 25. But it's very likely that lots of young people may have a plan going into college and through college, and that can now happen. Excuse me. Now, some things that you'll be quite familiar with. So the education provider that a child or young person will attend will be named in the plan. So as now with the statement, you would say, I want this school. Again, that's the same, apart from you can also name a college. So if there's a particular further education institution that a young person wants to go to, they can ask for it to be named in the plan. The local authority names it, the college has to admit them. At the moment, if you name a school in a plan, the school have to admit them. Okay? The duty is now to secure the education provision set out in the plan. So same as in the statement, education provision set out in the plan has to be provided. It must be provided. The local authority must make sure that that is provided. The duty to secure healthcare provision. So the healthcare provision that is reasonably required by the child or the young person's special educational need. Tricky. So there is a section in a plan for healthcare provision. And if it is healthcare provision that is connected to the child's SEN or impairment, and it is written in that bit of the plan, then the CCG or NHS England must provide it. Yes? It can do. Well, health would have to agree to it being put in the plan. The local authority writes the plan. So the local authority writes the education, health and care plan. Now, it's not going to put anything in the health bit of the plan without health agreeing. And health would have done an assessment as part of the assessment for the plan and then said, this is what we're going to provide. And then that would go into the plan, and then health have to provide that. But it must be related to the impairment. So, for example, for a young man with Down syndrome who also had a heart condition, that would be related to their impairment, and that would go in this bit of the plan. The provision that the health authority were making to support that. If that young man also had eczema, that's not related to their impairment, and that wouldn't go here. Now, the truth is, the detail of what's going to go in here, what it's going to look like, we don't know. And I imagine it's something that will be tested in law, at SEN tribunal or the courts. It's an important duty. It could be a very strong duty, but again, we have to wait and see. Now, include details of social care that is provided. And this is more likely if a child or young person is being provided with social care under Section 17 of the Children's Act, then it will be detailed in the plan. But you will already have to have your separate social care assessments. This is not an education, health and care plan. It's not a way of getting that. Okay, so that it will be detailed in the plan, set out in the plan, but it is not, or they have to provide that because it's in the plan. They have to provide that because it will be in a care plan separately. So it has particular sections. So at the moment, a statement has to look like a statement. It's set out how it has to look. There is no national, this is how it has to look for an education, health and care plan, but it must include sections A to K. So there's no national template, but there are sections A to K. And they have to be there. Okay, so as I said, they extend to colleges. So they will detail the support that the local authority and the college will provide to the young person in college, and they can name the college. That could be a local FE college, that could be a specialist college. Go crazy, don't go crazy, sorry, local authority. But that can be a college that you can ask to be named in the plan. Now, no one has to agree to it being named in the plan. The local authority may say, no, that's not an appropriate placement, but you can request for it to be named as you can a school. A plan will also extend into apprenticeship and when a young person is NEET. So up to 18, when a young person is not in education, employment or training, they can and should have a plan. Okay, the point of which is to try and get them back into education, employment or training, or to get them in it in the first place. Okay, now they can be maintained until a young person is 25. This would be based on whether the young person needs additional time to complete their education. So it doesn't go just on to 25 because, it can. There have to be a very good reason. And as to that young person needs that additional time remaining in education or an apprenticeship. Okay, so it is unlikely, as I said, that there's going to be lots and lots and lots of young people at 25 still with a plan. Most will have left education by that point. But it is a possibility for those who need that length of extra time to complete their education. Now, there's a big thing all through the Act and the Code about planning for adulthood and being very clear that this should start at 14 at the latest. So so parents and schools and colleges and local authorities should be talking to children from 13, 14 about their aspirations, about what they want to do. And starting planning for that. Based on outcomes, so a little bit more about what I touched on earlier, the aspirations that children, young people and their parents want must be included in education, health and care plans. So they must be there. Outcomes must be included in education, health and care plans and should support the child or young person to progress towards their aspirations. They should be SMART. Now, you're going to ask me what does SMART stand for? And I always get this wrong. Short term, manageable, achievable, measurable, reasonable, achievable, time limited. Never get that right. 11 years. Just can't do it. Marianne down here, she knows it. So when you need to know, she's the person to ask. Yes. Specific. Yeah, not so specific. You see, people in here need to be doing this bit. Honestly, it's just a thing I've got. Services should have some shorter-term targets for measuring whether a particular provision is helping a child or young person achieve their outcomes. So these, your longer-term outcomes, in schools and colleges, we should be making sure we have some shorter-term ones to make sure people that they're progressing towards these outcomes. Okay, but that's a big thing in these plans. Aspirations and outcomes. Not just, yeah, they're still happy. Yeah, they're still in the placement. Well, no, it needs to be more than that. And we need to be working towards, and aspirations are quite a hard thing. So, I won't mind me telling you this. So, Jane McConnell, who's Chief Executive of IPSI, her son Freddie's aspiration, he's a 15-year-old man with Down syndrome, is to be in Girls Aloud. Now, it is reasonably unlikely. However, that's his aspiration. Now, some of the outcomes could be, okay, so let's look at that. So, Freddie, should he be accessing more music classes? Should he be accessing, when we're thinking about college, is there some kind of arts and drama college he might want to be thinking about? You know, that's his aspiration. There are outcomes that you can do that are going towards that. That are looking at that are not just kind of writing it off, because that's just ready, let's look at going and doing some gardening course. That's not what Freddie's interested in. And Freddie has a right to have that aspiration and a right to have some outcomes that are related to it. So it's looking at it, but it's looking at what that child and young person wants. Okay. So, this is one of the big changes. This is one of the biggies. At 16, and we talked before about a legal definition of a young person under the Act, most young people will take on rights and responsibilities for their education, health and care plan. It becomes their plan. This is subject to their capacity. We'll come on to this. And a young person can always ask their parent to act for them. So at 16, you're a young person, it is your plan. The rights and responsibilities that come along with that plan are theirs. At any point, they can say and they can ask and make it clear that they want their parent to act for them. And if the young person is not deemed to have capacity to make some or any of these decisions, it is assumed that their parent will do so on their behalf. So young people need to be better prepared for decision-making at an earlier age. And as we said, the planning provision needs to focus on their aspirations and the outcomes that they want to achieve. So what decisions? So I think it's very easy just to go, yeah, all the decisions are theirs. And everyone kind of goes, okay, we need to be clear what these decisions actually are. So these are decisions around an education, health and care plan. They are the right to request an education, health and care assessment. The right to make representations about the content of the plan. This is what I want in my plan. The right to request a particular institution is named in the plan. The right to request a personal budget, we'll come on to personal budgets, and the right to appeal to the SEND tribunal. For a 16-year-old young person with capacity, these are their rights. This is their plan. Okay, so local authorities, schools, colleges, health services and others should continue to involve parents in discussions when their child reaches 16. A decision by a young person in respect of an education, health and care plan will typically involve their family and others. So this is what the Code of Practice talks about. A young person, as we said, can ask a family member or friend to support them in any way they wish, including acting on their behalf. But we have to be very clear, the final decision rests with the young person. It is their decision. The presumption is that in most cases where a young person lacks capacity, the decision will be taken by their parents. But if they have capacity, it is their decision. So a lot of people say, well, what if they make a bad decision? Well, you know what people do. I do, you probably do, 16-year-olds do. They are allowed to make bad decisions. Annoying, but there it is. Education, health and care plans do not end when a young person leaves school. As we've said, they must be maintained until 18. unless special education provision is no longer required. They can then be maintained for young people aged 19 to 25, and local authorities must have regard to whether the educational training outcomes have been achieved. So we talked about the outcomes in the plan. A local authority, if it wants to cease a plan, so stop having a plan for a young person aged 18 or above, it must have regard to have they reached their educational and training outcomes? Have they been achieved? Right. Personal budgets. Here we go. Now, you'll have heard, well, you may not have heard a lot about personal budgets. But personal budgets have been quite a big thing. Everyone's going to have a personal budget. We need to be realistic about what the law says, about what the guidance says, and what we mean by personal budgets when we talk in relation to the Education, Health and Care Act. So personal budgets, when we talk about them in social care, often mean the same as a direct payment. That's not the same in Education, Health and Care Act. Okay, it's in section 49 for your further reading. A personal budget is an amount identified as available to secure particular provision in the plan. So we talked about the plan setting out education provision. This is mainly what we're talking about here. So 15 hours learning support assistant, 3 hours a week speech and language therapy, which would be nice, 1 hour physio, whatever, that bit, which does still have to be specified and quantified, which would normally mean hours, by the way. Okay, so firstly, personal budget. It has to be requested by a parent or young person, so you have to ask the local authority when they're preparing a plan that you want them to set out a personal budget. So that will be, in effect, in the plan, a sum of money. This is how much it costs for that particular provision. Now, some or all of that personal budget can be taken as a direct payment in certain circumstances. So there's that money, learning support assistant, £15,000. In certain circumstances, that could be taken as a direct payment. So that direct payment is money going directly to the parent or the young person to spend on that provision. Okay, it can only be spent on that provision. It can only be spent on what is set out in the plan. It cannot be spent on gin, for example. It's short-sighted, but there we have it. Yes. Oh, I'm going to come on to this, so I will talk a little bit more about this. Now, they'll police it, and that if your child isn't getting that provision because you've spent the money on something else, then they'll take the money away from you. No, it has to be spent on that. They're not just going to give you the money. There'll have to be arrangements. They'll have to be absolutely convinced that you are going to spend the money on that. They're going to need you to be an employer. They're going to need to know who you've employed. They're not going to allow you to spend it on gin. So, all the information about personal budgets will be set out in the local offer. Now, limitations. Okay, so this is where we get to the fine detail about personal budgets and direct payments. So, firstly, for the local authority to set out a personal budget, it has to be able to disaggregate the money. By that I mean, local authorities pay for stuff in big blocks. Of course they do. They're providing speech and language therapy for 500, 1,000, however many children. They have a block contract. Now, they have to be able to disaggregate, take away your child's individual money from that huge amount of money. In most contracts that local authorities have at the moment, they are not going to necessarily be able to do that, in which case it will not be detailed as a personal budget. As I said, direct payments can only be made in respect of the special education provision set out in the plan. So it can't be used for a placement, it can't be used for a school. And the head teacher or a principal of a school or a college can veto, so they can say no to a parent or young person having a direct payment and using it in their provision. Now, the reason is, obviously, is if you are a head teacher in a school and a parent wants to use their direct payment to employ the learning support assistant to come into your school who you do not have any control over. You don't direct their time, you don't manage them, they don't come under the terms and conditions of anyone else working in your school. So as a head teacher, you may be unlikely to agree that. And you can see why they might not. College, possibly different. And there are times it would be a huge advantage. So for some children and young people who have a personal assistant at home, for that to come over into college or school, sometimes can work incredibly well. Direct payments may be used for bits of equipment that a child or young person could then take home. Incredibly useful. Again, this is something that, while all of these things have been pathfinded, there is not a huge amount of evidence about how these are working or will work in practice. One of the things that people have looked at is transport, so a direct payment for transport, which local authorities have been able to do for years. But that can often help with, if a child or young person wanted to stay after school or college for an extracurricular activity, the taxi or the bus picks up at 3:15 and that's it. A direct payment for transport could mean that you would organise for that taxi to pick them up at 5 so they could access that. So there are some huge possibilities here, but I think we have to be really, really clear that there are some quite big limitations as well. Okay, now I'm going to go on and talk about children and young people with SEN but without a plan, because the Act is quite plan specific. So it's talking about children and young people, a tiny minority of those children and young people with SEN. Around 83% of children and young people have SEN who do not have a statement and will not have a plan. So I'm going to go and talk about them. Is there any other questions about that last bit? Yes.
You said that the plan can't continue on to... Thanks. You said that the plan can't continue on to university.
No.
So if you had somebody with quite a severe physical disability that wanted to go on to university, so cognitively able, how then is that funded?
Okay, so there's the Disabled Students Allowance, which is an allowance for students when they go to university, which the government was about to do a kind of look at, but I think it has maybe put that into abeyance. I'll have to check, because there was quite an outcry. And actually often, a lot of parents and young people would say the support they get in university was much better than the support they had in schools. Not always, but it is reasonably common. So most universities actually are reasonably good at supporting young people with disabilities or SEN, and there is money and grants available. Now, that isn't saying that I don't think there was quite a good case for education, health and care plans going into university, but they don't. My advice would always be, if you're going to go into university, is just go and look and talk to the universities. You might be surprised what they can offer. Okay, so children and young people without an education, health and care plan. So we're going to look at the SEN requirements, the Equality Act and other requirements for schools, colleges and early year settings. I have gone on, haven't I? Right, I better go quick. So there is the Equality Act. I'm not going to read all of this out. I'm not going to go into huge detail. But we mustn't forget about the Equality Act. It is a strong piece of legislation. It applies to all schools, colleges, early years settings, all types of schools, so private schools, independent schools, and it has duties on those institutions for them not to make direct or indirect discrimination against children and young people. If they fail to make reasonable adjustments, so schools, colleges, they have to make reasonable adjustments, children and young people with a disability. They have to provide auxiliary aids and services. Now, a lot of this comes through the SEN framework, but there are children and young people who have a disability who may not have an SEN. and may not have a plan. And even if they do, schools and colleges have duties towards those children and young people. They may not always be as aware of them as they might be, but they are there. So an auxiliary aid in service could encompass, for a young person with a hearing impairment, a signer. These are particularly strong duties for, as I said, for private schools or schools that do not have to follow the Children and Families Act. They do have to follow the Equalities Act. And they carry on applying to all schools and colleges. They have to have plans that are increasing access to the curriculum, the physical environment. Schools do not have to make physical alterations, but they do, like I said, have to make reasonable adjustments. So if you had a child with a mobility impairment and they put their classroom on the 3rd floor and they were no longer able to access it, a reasonable adjustment would be to move that class to the ground floor. So it's not an insignificant duty, and I just wanted to highlight it there. So schools, early years settings and colleges must have regard to the SEND Code of Practice, and they must comply with the Equality Act. Schools and colleges must use their best endeavours to meet children and young people's special educational needs. Now, best endeavours was in the last act. Everyone has always thought it was quite a weak duty, but it's not. Everything they can. So then this Code of Practice says that schools and colleges must do everything they can to meet a child or young person's special educational need. Now, previous case law has defined best endeavours as essentially doing what the code says. It is likely there may be new case law over this definition, because everything you can is not qualified. So I want the school painted pink. Unlikely, but doesn't say you can't. So it is likely there may be some case law around this, but it is a strong duty. Schools are expected to meet children and young people's needs, and they have resources to do so. Schools and colleges must cooperate with the local authority. And these are all schools and colleges. These are academies, these are free schools. And they must admit a child or a young person if they are named in an education, health and care plan. So if the local authority names a school, this is the school must admit them. Excuse me. So schools must have a SENCO. And the SENCO must be a qualified teacher. So there might be some academies and free schools where the SENCO is the only qualified teacher, but the SENCO must be a qualified teacher. Schools must inform parents if they're making special education provision. They must include children with SEN in school activities with other children. And they must publish information on how they meet the needs of children with SEN. This is the SEN Information Report. It is not the school's local offer. It is the SEN Information Report. Every school must have one. It must be published on their website. There is a whole list of things it must include, which is in the SEN Code of Practice for your later reading, and it must publish it. Sensibly, the local authority's local offer will link to all of these when they're all up and running. They may not all be yet, but the SEN Information Report. Okay, something to look out for. So some other highlights, or depending how you think of it, from the Code of Practice. The removal of School Action Plus. It is now replaced with SEN support. Like I said, if your child has SEN, it is likely they still have SEN. Removal of School Action does not mean that all those children and young people no longer account as having SEN. It is still a graduated response, and there is a circle of assess, plan, do, and review. Schools and colleges will be doing assessing a child, planning how to meet their needs, doing it, and then reviewing it. They can call in external specialists at any point. Individual education plans are no longer required by the code, but parents must be involved in participating in identification and planning and doing and assessing, and they should meet 3 times a year with the school. A discussion with parents should include discussions on needs, outcomes, provision, and timings for review. A note of the discussion has to be given to parents. Not to understand an IEP, because the government had committed to not having IEPs, and there was quite a lot of disquiet about that. So it is now a note of the discussion. And schools are required, as ever, to keep records, and parents can always ask for copies of those. Right, transitional arrangements. I'll whiz through this. Okay, so there's statutory guidance. All this, as I said, is new. No one is expected to be able to do it immediately. And in fairness to local authorities, the DfE issued their guidance on transitional arrangements on the 28th of August, which possibly not ideal timing. So, the transition to the new birth to 25 special education needs and disability system, statutory guidance for local authorities. That's what this is. Some of the highlights, if I can call them that. All children and young people with statements of SEN must transfer to the new system by April 2018, following a transfer review. Young people who receive support through learning difficulty assessments must be transferred to the new system by the 1st of September 2016. This is the only must. Okay, so the government suggests there might be other priorities for local authorities to look at, but this is the only must. So local authorities should have published a transition plan, co-produced with children and young people and their parents. However, in reality, how one would have done that from the 28th of August, when it had to be published by September, tricky. But it is a draft plan, so it's probably being worked on. So it has to set out which children and young people will be transferred to the new system first, how many each year, and details of the transfer review process. So the education needs assessment should be person-centred and focus on outcomes, so it cannot be a change the name of the statement. So you can't have a statement here and then just go, right, cross out the word statement, right, education, health and care plan. That's not allowed. As part of the transfer review, local authorities must ensure that the child's parents or the young person are invited to a meeting to contribute to the transfer review. But the meeting is not the transfer review. It is part of the transfer review. Okay? Children and young people with a statement of SEN must receive a transfer review to move to the new system. The local authority must inform parents of the young person at least 2 weeks prior to the commencement of the transfer review. Awkward, because as soon as the local authority sends out that letter, the transfer review starts. So sensibly, local authority would probably be having conversations with them beforehand. And a transfer review requires a local authority to undertake an education, health and care needs assessment. So when we talked about the assessment previously, that is what this is. It is not just a meeting, it is an assessment. Now, one of the differences is that you may already have evidence from your statement, from the EP or assessments, that are fine, that you're happy with. And therefore, they would not need to be done again. In fact, they cannot be done again if everyone is happy with them. But if you're not happy with those assessments, if either the local authority, the person who wrote them, or yourself, parents or a young person, aren't happy with that assessment, you can ask for there to be a new assessment. Okay, so there'll be some cases where, a child will see an EP when they're 5, get the EP assessment for the statement, and won't have another one, and they'll be 13. So the last assessment from an EP 10 years ago. In that case, you'd have to have a new assessment. So, as I said, between 1st September 2014 and September 2015, local authority must undertake transfer reviews, children and young people's statements prior to them transferring from school to post-16. Okay. Now, think this is my little game, but we might have just to rush on. You know, I feel like I should do the little game because it could be kind of panto-ish, and you could all shout it out. It's my true or false game. Okay, we'll give it one go. So, most children currently on school action will no longer be entitled to extra support from September 2014. Yay! Well done, everyone. Okay, so as I said, the legal definition of SEN has not changed. After September 2014, no new statements will be issued. Excellent work. True. Each school will have to prepare their own local offer by September 2014. It's an SEN information report. Okay, it's not a local offer. And while some people are calling it a local offer, I think that's very confusing, and it's not what the law says. It's an information report. That's what they need to do. Go and find it. Very quickly, this is who we are. We're the Information Advice and Support Service Network. We support all the Information Advice and Support Services. You'll have known Parent Partnership Services. Well, they are now Information Advice and Support Services. The reason that they are, and the reason for the change, this is Section 32, where you're interested, not going to read it all out, is that before September, the duty of local authorities was to provide advice and information to parents of children and young people with SEN on matters relating to SEN. That was it, done by a Parent Partnership Service. Thank you very much. September comes around, September the 1st, these are the duties. So duty, still to a parent of a child or young person with SEN. Duty to a parent of a child or young person with a disability on matters related to that disability, with or without SEN. Duty to provide information, advice and support to a child with SEN, to a child with a disability, so child under 16, a young person with SEN and a young person with a disability, on matters relating to. So this is no longer just education, this is a duty directly for that child, young person and parent to have information, advice and support, which is why no longer Parent Partnership Services. Okay, and there are some duties around in the regulations about personal budgets. There must be information, advice and support on personal budgets, and on information, advice and support around plans, assessment and plans. So there's details that the local authority must provide. So there is an expectation that many children and young people will receive information, advice and support either via or alongside their parent. However, local authorities must ensure that children and young people are able to receive information, advice and support separately from their parents. They have a right to that separately. We are working on how this is going to look, particularly for children, which is very different from doing it obviously for young people. But they have a right. It is their right to have information, advice and support as an individual. So, this is the law, those are the regulations, this is the code of practice, this is what the DfE and the government are saying, this is how you do this. So you do it through an impartial information, advice and support. So chapter 2, the title is impartial. So local authority have to provide it, but it has to be impartial. So it cannot tell you what the local authority does without telling you anything else. All the information, advice and support is based on the law. So it has to be a dedicated and easily identifiable service, built on the Parent Partnership Service. Young people must be able to access it independently. It should be impartial, confidential, arm's length, free and accessible. And should work with representative groups such as the Parent Care Forum to ensure that the views and experiences of children, young people and parents informing policy and practice. So they have to provide information, advice and support on local policy and practice, local offer, personalisation and personal budgets, education law on SEN and related law on disability, health and social care. This is no longer an education service. This is education, health and social care through suitably independently trained staff. They must help children, young people and parents to gather, understand and interpret information and apply it to their own situation, and provide advice through casework and other ways. Because this is what this service must do. So this is a huge extension of this service. So we nationally support all of these services, and many of them are tiny. And the ability of them to do all of this is, well, it's tricky. But we are working on it, the DFE are working on it, and I know that they came to Torbay recently, and they emailed me about it yesterday and said how impressed they were, frankly, with both the Information Advice and Support Service and with Torbay in general. So that was good. So there are some quality standards that we have developed for Information Advice and Support Service with the DFE. I won't go into them. You'll get the slides and you can look at them. Some of the things we do, we provide the independent legal training for all Information Advice and Support Services. So they will all have high-quality legal training from the Solicitors Regulatory Authority. So they will know what they are talking about. As if you know Marianne, you will know that anyway. Okay, now I have gone on, I think, too much, and I was kind of panicking how I was going to fill this time, and I have now filled it too much. So I apologise for that. Is there anything you'd like to ask me quickly? I'm sorry it was such a rush through. Excellent. Stunned you all into just shocked silence or desperation to get out. Completely understand that. Thank you very much.